Welcome to Life on Life's Terms, episode 53. It's your host, Justin, with Emeritus Archbishop Sylvain Lavoie. We're going to talk about abuse of power, the art of an apology, the premise of AA's Step 8 and 9, and how an institution can utilize these principles within an apology to the general public. Before we get into that, though, I have to pay some bills, so let's give a shout out to Liam Connolly at Connolly Law. For all of your Canadian law, will, estate, and media issues, please Google Liam Connolly at Connolly Law. He would be so happy to help you with any of your law issues. For all of your counseling needs, such as addiction and family counseling, please Google adaras.ca. That's ADARS.ca. The famous Chris Suchit will be able to accommodate you through Skype or FaceTime for your mental health needs, regardless of where you geographically are. So, let's get into the show. How is your day going so far?
Hello, Justin. Pretty good.
Yeah?
I'm over jet lag and back to normal.
Well, then it's been a little while since you were here. I think last time we were talking about books and and the development of your new book coming out, which should be soon, right?
Coming out in the spring, but I sent in the final copy of the manuscript proofread this morning. Actually.
Oh, excellent. Yeah. Excellent. How are you liking that tea?
Excellent. Rooibos.
Yeah, Rooibos tea from Acquired Tea Company. Yeah. Best tea company in Edmonton, I believe. So let's get into abuse of power. We're not here to make any claim or statement for the Catholic Church as an institution itself. I'm going to make that quite clear right off the beginning. We're just talking in a general way about what that is. Because I think at this present moment, there are institutions in our world right now, whether it be the Catholic Church or the American government or the Canadian government, that is abusing their power thoroughly. So let's hear your premise on that.
I think not just those institutions, but I think nations are also abusing their power. If you look at what's happening in Yemen right now, like people hanging on to power at the cost of how many thousands of deaths, power is, I think there's a reason why all this is happening. I think it's pretty basic. There are some false gods out there. In fact, in the big book, they're called money, fame, and power.
Yeah.
And those are the same temptations that the Israelis faced in the desert and kept falling for. And I think that's why when Jesus was baptized and filled with the love and the blessing of the Father, he could go out into the desert and face those same temptations. But he said no to them all. I love the way that's spelled out, or that comes out in Scripture. You can imagine it this way, Satan goes to Jesus and says, "You claim to be the Son of God. How can you be the Son of God if you're so poor? You don't have any money. Turn these rocks into bread." But Jesus, so secure in the Father's love for him, and I think that's the key. The more secure people are in how loved they are by God, the less they're going to need these false gods. Anyway, Jesus said, "No, I don't need to be rich to be the Son of God." So, man does not live in bread alone. So Satan tries again. Jump off this temple. How can you be the Son of God if you're you're a big fat nobody? Nobody knows who you are.
Yeah.
And so Jesus said, "Well, no, I don't have to be famous to be the Son of God." So, fame and prestige, that he was able to say no to that. And the third one is the kicker. It's, how can you be the Son of God if you have no power, no control? Bow down and worship me, and I'll give you all these kingdoms. And again, so secure in the Father's love for him, Jesus could say, "No, I don't need to have power or control, to be the Son of God." And get lost, Satan. And I think that's what the whole world is falling for. It's these false gods, and especially the one of power and control. That's the biggest one. And it seems like people will do anything at all costs to maintain power and control. And unfortunately, the church is divine and human, and the human part of it is also subject to the same thing. We can get infected with, power and control, and very easily.
So I think in the earlier days of Life on Life's Terms, I did a bio over five episodes. And a big part of my bio was the sexual abuse that I had personally gone through. And since then, I work with a lot of people in addiction who have also been sexually abused and male of nature. And one of the things that I had recognized was people said, "How can you forgive those people who have abused you in this way?" And I thought to myself, you know what? In reality, I abuse society through my addiction. You know, that's what I did. And when I had abused people through my addiction in that regard, I had to come out and make amends to society. And that's essentially what I do today, right? Mm-hmm. What I came to understand, though, is when I was in active addiction, that wasn't who I was. Sure, those are the things I did, and I'm responsible for them 100%. I'm not copping out saying that I wasn't responsible for them. I was. But I also recognized that I needed to make amends to society. So the thing that I thank God for is this. I can't say whether my abuser was right or wrong. I'm not going to go there. I mean, in my opinion, it was wrong what he did to me, but this is where my empathy comes in place, is I thank God every day that I'm a drug addict and not a sex addict. Because if I was a sex addict in that capacity, that'd be very, very difficult. I mean, the level of denial. I know how the level of my denial and addiction was, to think that it was only me hurting myself, right? But all of a sudden, if you think about the denial of these victims actually love me, you know, that's where that denial is coming from, right? And that, I mean, I have empathy for that, because I thank God every day that that's not an issue that I have today. And God bless them if they can find recovery from that, you know? And I think that's one of these things where when we talk about abuse of power, sure, there's abuse of power in that context, but there's also a level of not understanding what they're doing. There's a level of denial. There's a level of something that just isn't right, you know?
Lots of times there's no connection. Like, people who may be abusers have no concept of how much harm they're doing to their victims. They have absolutely it just doesn't register. I don't know. It's kind of a mystery. Maybe just being human for some people, or something missing. I don't know what that would be. I don't know if anybody really knows.
Yeah.
But I think part of the problem is that we, as a society, we don't have a really healthy understanding of human sexuality. I think that's probably the basic problem. And I think as a church, we also maybe fail in that area as well. I think we're getting better at it. Actually, I think that all that sexual abuse scandals or whatever that's happening, I don't think it's any worse in the church than it is anywhere else in society. I think statistically, I think some people have shown me this. Somebody who had basically was writing an article defending the church and telling the media to stop picking on them because it was just as bad everywhere else. I mentioned that to a friend of mine who was a former priest. He said, I'm going to do some research. And he did. And he said, you know something? He thinks they're right. Yeah, this is rampant right across the board. We just get all the attention. I'm not sure why. Maybe because of the phenomena of celibacy, perhaps. I don't know exactly why. But I think I have a feeling that what's happening, maybe God is using the church to try to heal our society of this lack of understanding of sexuality. And one example of that is this little book that just came out by the Canadian bishops. It's called Protecting Minors from Sexual Abuse, a call to the Catholic faithful in Canada for healing, reconciliation, and transformation.
Wow.
I think stuff like this is happening in the church now, and we're probably going to be leading the way in terms of a better understanding of human sexuality in our society. And I wouldn't be surprised that maybe the safest place in the future for kids to be would be, you know, in a Catholic parish or Catholic school or whatever.
I mean, I've heard from some people that close to you and I personally who have said they were amazed that the Catholic Church hasn't crumbled under the weight of this particular issue.
Well,
right?
I think, you know, God's in charge. I'm not worried about that at all.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think we really have to go back to where is this mystique or this misunderstanding of human sexuality. And I think it goes back to creation. You know, in Scripture, we have the divine power, God saying, let us make man and woman in our own image. In our own image, let us make them. Well, what's that about? I mean, is it a subtle hint that God might be Trinity back in the first pages of the Bible? I don't think so. Who else uses that language today? It's monarchy. It's the Pope. I heard him say that. And with regard to sexual abuse, we responded too late, you know.
Yeah.
But kings and queens use that kind of language, you know, we, the majestic plural. So what's happening there is God can hold male and female energy together. We can't. We're born male or female. Nowadays, it's getting a little bit more confused, not clear. But that beside the point, you know, archetypally, and we're born with this deep yearning within us for completion, for wholeness, for consummation. That every human being has that. And that's very difficult to negotiate at the best of times and in the best of families. It's pretty tough. And it has to do with wanting to see God face to face. It's a divine fire. We're made imago Dei, in the image and likeness of God. And that creates a longing within us, a holy longing, a divine fire for that completion, that wholeness, which we'll never experience in this life completely. It's just the human condition. It's the angst of being human. If we don't understand this, and if we're growing up in dysfunctional families where the love might be present but it's not available, there might be addiction, there might be whatever, then you've got this longing for completion on the one side, and you've got this incredible loneliness. Just recently somebody came for spiritual direction and they said they're lonely. I mean, a married person, a good relationship, but there's a loneliness there because it's the human condition, And if we don't understand this, we're going to be looking for love in the wrong places. We're going to be trying to satisfy that yearning, that longing with some physical, sexual stuff. I'll give you an example. There was a minister, I won't identify any congregation, whatever, was in therapy for actually acting out sexually. Couldn't figure out why. He wasn't very close to his parents. He wasn't very close to his wife either. They didn't really have a very good relationship. He had a paraplegic older brother he was looking after, and that brother died. And anyway, about a year later, he's in therapy. And the therapist, they did a genogram, a life.
Yeah.
And the therapist pointed out, you ever stop to think that about a year to the day that your brother died, you started acting out sexually? Well, that was it. What happened was intimacy dropped out of his life, and he found himself moving in that direction, trying to fill that hole. It's amazing. And it happens to politicians. It happened to politicians this week in Ottawa.
Yeah.
I think that's what's going on. I think that if people aren't in an intimate relationship with a soulmate, with somebody who they can trust completely and trust them completely, and they've forgiven each other everything, and they're one, they're mellow, there's peace, there's joy, there's serenity in life, there's going to be something missing, and they're going to try to find it in the wrong places. So I think that's where a lot of that comes from.
I quite agree. And I think that there's also some fundamentals, like I'll refer to my younger childhood growing up. So me and my mother, we had a conversation. And one of the things that we had talked about was I remember sitting in jail one time, and I was on the phone with her, and she was crying. She was very upset. And I said to her, you know what, you got to know that it's not your fault that I'm an addict. Right?
No.
And she said, I don't believe that. Right? She's like, there's something that I did. And so 5 years later, this has stumped me, why she wouldn't let go of that, and why she felt she had that control, why she owned a piece of that. And what I had realized is, if I look at my grandmother, my grandmother is a borderline sociopath, 100%. And so my mom was born, and then her dad died 2 years after she was born. So my mom was 2 years old and her dad died. And so my mom's entire life was being blamed about the death of her father. Her entire life. Yeah. So when I look at that self-esteem, my mother was a chubby little girl. She was always picked on and teased relentlessly. Her brothers and sisters didn't like her very much. She was always pinned. My grandmother would always pin her with her sister to take her along. And so my mother always felt like she was the black sheep. And so then all of a sudden, my mom was a young mother having me. And my mom said to me a little while ago, because I read this thing about, look at, Mom, was there a time when you let me cry a little too long? Because there's some serious psychologists, clinical psychologists, who have said that if a mother can figure out or discern a time that they might have neglected their child, they can say, look at Justin, I love you, but yeah, I did. I messed up. And this is because this goes back to the implicit memory. Okay. And if you can somehow acknowledge an apology to that implicit memory, the person then can actually accept that as being adequate, and they'll walk on. But if the parent tries to bullshit you, it doesn't work, because the implicit memory will say, no, that doesn't line up, because it's an intuition as implicit memory. It's intuitive, right? So one of the things when I was talking to my mom is this: as we're going down this conversation, I said, I'm not trying to pick on you. I just want to know, like, I'm just trying to get past my own abandonment issues.
Yeah.
Right? That's what I'm trying to do. And my mom finally had said to me, she goes, you know what? I know I left you a couple times, and we talked about it, but she couldn't remember entirely.
Yeah, when or where.
And then she said, but you know what I do remember, Justin, is when I had you, I could love you. She's like, I fell unconditionally in love with you. But she said, I didn't understand the responsibility that it was loving you because I was so young. And she's like, one of the things that I totally underestimated was that I thought love was putting a pair of Levi's jeans on you with a pair of Converse shoes and a white T-shirt and calling you boss. She's like, I thought that was love.
Yeah.
But she said, what I didn't do was I didn't find my own self-esteem to give you.
Yeah. Well, that's part of the problem, I think, that you're putting your finger on, because you're talking about everybody sort of carries their original wound, their core grief. There's a lack of love. Maybe it's trauma in some people's lives. It doesn't have to be that. It can just be a love that's present but not available, or a mistaken notion of love, like your mother was talking about. That's what I thought love was. But it takes a while for us to really learn what love really is. And it's totally... I think that happened when Jesus died on the cross. I think for the first time now we finally see what love really is.
Yeah.
And it's humility, it's mercy, it's compassion, it's unconditional. You can't earn it. It's forgiveness. It's total nonviolence. That's what love really is. And how many of us are there, in terms of really understanding love like that? We get it confused with sex, genital sex or whatever, And so I think it's really important. Yeah, it's something we've all got to learn is, can we really, really love one another?
So one of these things, too, that I'll get into about active addiction that actually kind of fits with this genital sex piece is this. So why is it that it's so difficult for a heroin addict to give up heroin? Well, because by implicit memory, they don't feel loved. Right? So secondly, what does opium do to your opiate receptors? Is it makes you feel loved. That's why it's a hard sell to tell an opiate user, no. Why would I want to give up a chemical that makes me feel loved? Right? This is what love is to me in my mind. And sometimes, especially for alcoholics, they found love when their mother was caressing them and there was beer coming off of their breath. Okay, so then the implicit memory becomes love is okay with alcohol.
Yeah.
Right? Because when
Gets confused.
And when a mother looks at that baby, right, and the baby looks up at her, and the baby falls in love with the mother, and the mother falls in love with the baby, right? So this is where this gets mixed up. But if you look at the chemical secretion when somebody has an orgasm, it's the same idea. Your endorphins are through the roof, and your opiate receptors believe it's the same kind of love, right? So like we get micro doses of that when we hug, when we look in somebody's eyes and we have that unconditional feeling about them, that happens. And then all of a sudden it's just an explosion through a physical manifestation, right? And yet it's not as real as the other kind of love that we're feeling.
Yeah, see, the difference, I think, is that real love will lead to joy and peace and serenity and mellowness. And, it's a deep, deep spiritual reality, and it's a gift of the Holy Spirit. Whereas pleasure, even happiness, it's kind of emotions that come and go or whatever. People are looking for happiness or pleasure or whatever. And you're getting that high, sort of that high that comes from the dopamines or whatever, but it doesn't last. That's the difference between... St. Ignatius knew that. That's what really helped him understand. When he would read sort of worldly literature, he would have pleasure for a few minutes, and then he'd kind of feel down after a while, Then he'd read the lives of the saints, and he was inspired, and he noticed after a while, gee whiz, that kind of lasts, like it lasted all day. And he started noticing the difference between... what's really real, what's spiritual, and what's pseudo-spiritual, if you want to put it that way, or kind of a false type of feeling. It's just an emotion that comes or goes. But what God wants for us is, I think, the gifts of the Spirit, like peace and joy and serenity. That's not just an emotion. It's a gift.
Well, and I think it's also one of these things, too, for people who are dating in the world out there, sex is so easily found within our culture that the whole idea of love gets mixed up with infatuation. Mm-hmm. And then next thing you know, you're pregnant and you're having kids, you have to get married and so on and so forth. And the next thing you know, it's like you're in a family that you never really wanted because of infatuation, as opposed to actually discerning what love is.
Yeah.
You know?
Spiritually, St. John of the Cross was a master at this, you know. He would talk about the stages of growing. First of all, it was kind of pre-conversion. That's a pretty shallow, you know. Mm-hmm. Our relationships, it's kind of like, what's in it for me, you know. That's the first stage. And then there's the conversion stage, you know, like somebody falls in love. You meet someone, oh my God, now you know, you can stay there forever, you know. Yeah. And then there's first fervor. You can talk about this forever. You can talk about your girlfriend, whatever, you know. It's just like, I could die right now and my life is complete, you know. Yeah. The trouble is, you know, it doesn't last. That's the honeymoon stage, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And it doesn't last. Honeymoons don't last. They're not meant to last. Yeah. They're not really real. You know, that's not real life. The honeymoon is you get 2 weeks to yeah. do what you want to do. You have to come back and get a job or something. Yeah. And then there's a waning of first fervor. Like, it doesn't last. It wanes. And that's the critical point now, where lots of people tend to give up or start over or whatever. You know, they can't move a little bit further into kind of this is a dark night of the senses now. You know, this is where you're really being tested. And then you got to move to commitment, you know, mm-hmm. to kind of a commitment. And that's where a lot of people, you know, can't go there. You
know what comes to my mind is I read this article a little while ago about how if you were to take a 22-year-old male today and drop them in a 22-year-old's life in the 1950s, they wouldn't even be able to comprehend, because the contrast is this. Let's talk about a 22-year-old out on the farm who now is running a business called a farm, has a wife and a child probably on the way. They were able to deal at 22 years old. They could hold that responsibility and be okay with that. Mm-hmm. Let's put a 22-year-old with those responsibilities on them today, not measuring up.
There's one reason for that. This comes from Pierre-Olivier Tremblay. He's the brother Oblate. Now, he's just been made a bishop down Eastham. And he worked with university students. And he noticed that the young people today have a lack of hope. And the reason why is they lack an infinite horizon mm-hmm. into which they can place their lives, you know. And so all they've got left is whatever happens to them that day. And if their girlfriend breaks up with them, well, they go out and take their lives. You know, it's like this is the end of the world. They don't realize that there's a bigger picture out there, that, you know, there is a whole, that God loves them infinitely, and that there's eternal life, and there's way much more than this life. And we're just on our way to somewhere bigger. And, you know, we used to have that. That's what you're talking about. In the 50s, we had a certain kind of culture and stability and security, and we had that infinite horizon. We could place our lives into a bigger picture. We knew life wasn't just about us, and that's what male initiation is about too. Mm-hmm. It's like Richard Rohr and Illumin. You know, it's about, you know, life is hard, and you're going to die, and you know.
well, and I think that's one of the things that Jordan Peterson always talks about is you need to take your own responsibility. Like, I just did a blog, which would be last week now. When this show's published, where I basically said at the bottom of the blog, where I said, you can disagree with many of the points that I'm making in this blog, mm-hmm. and that's fine. You're entitled to that. Yeah. Or you can look for the points that you agree with. But at the end of the day, when you make your choice, the issue becomes this. It's your mental health and your emotional well-being that you are basically discerning with. Because if you decide to make an issue and be offended by what I'm saying, that's your choice. If you decide to find the positivity in the things that you might be agreeable to and find the amicability in that, well then that's also part of your emotional well-being. But it's your responsibility of where you want to line up in this thing. You can be completely outraged, you can be kind of outraged, or you can say, okay, I get that side of it. Or you can just say, yeah, it all makes sense. I mean, the variety is yours. Yeah. But the thing that's at stake is your emotional well-being.
Yeah, and speaking of that, you know, what's happening is I think people are carrying a kind of a spiritual burden, you know, kind of it's an emotional one. First of all, we've all been hurt. So lots of people are carrying anger and resentment. And if that hurt is really a trauma, there's going to be shock and maybe shame, and that'll spin off into all kinds of other things. And then every time we're hurt, there's a loss of some kind, well-being, relationship, whatever. So there's going to be sadness and self-pity. And then if people don't know what to do with those emotions, and kids growing up in dysfunctional families can't talk, can't trust, can't feel, well, then they're lonely, for one thing, and they start acting out of those emotions. A lot of the stuff that happens out in our world is kids acting out of their pain.
Yeah.
They don't know what to do with it. A good definition of addiction is its attempt to avoid legitimate suffering.
Yeah.
It's medicating pain.
Yeah.
It's trying not to feel hurt anymore because they're hurt so much already. So you've got anger and resentment and shock and shame and sadness and self-pity. What do you do with that? You start acting out of it, and then you start hurting other people, and then you feel guilt and fear. Well, that's a pretty big, heavy load to carry, Mm-hmm. Those are big, eight really heavy-duty emotions that people are carrying, and it's like the big spiritual burden, and don't know what to do with them. And I think that's where two things come in really handy. One is forgiveness, the ability to forgive the
Mm-hmm.
hurt. The other one is the be able to apologize for the pain that we've caused. And if we're not able to do those two things, and in a way, our society doesn't really understand forgiveness or apologies nowadays. I remember using that word at a residential school, a TRC type of preparation in Calgary.
So what's TRC again? Truth
and Reconciliation Commission. Phil Fontaine had asked me and his sister Gloria to speak at that.
So what exactly is that? Just so that the listeners kind of understand what that commission is.
Well, this is part of the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement process in Canada, signed in 2007, and part of that was the 5-year, turned out to be almost 7 years, I think, of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission with 3 commissioners. Actually, one of them, Marie Wilson, is going to be speaking at the Star of the North tomorrow night.
Oh, wow, that's excellent. Part
of a follow-up to it. And then they came up with 94 calls to action in Canada to promote healing and reconciliation with regard to the residential schools and healing between Canadian society and Indigenous peoples in Canada. And so I was at this conference, and I happened to use the word forgiveness, and a psychologist came up at me after. She was very angry. And she said, "How dare you use that word, forgiveness? It doesn't belong in this process. You're just saying that because you're a Christian." And I said to her, "Ma'am, it seems to me that unless people at least move towards forgiveness, and they're going to be angry for the rest of their lives." And she said, "It's okay to be angry as long as it doesn't control you." I said, "I forgive you." No, I didn't say that. But anyway, I was shocked. I thought, wow, here's somebody who does not believe in forgiveness.
Yeah.
Wow, we're going to have a lot of angry people walking around, unhealthy people, I think. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really, really important that in fact, why in the Walk a New Path, one chapter was, and there's a new book coming out as well. It's chapters on forgiveness and a chapters on the art of the apology.
So let's get into a little bit of the art of the apology, if you don't mind unwrapping that a little bit or unloading that a little bit. How are you breaking that down?
Mm-hmm. Well, this is step 8 and 9 of the 12-step program.
Okay.
Step 8 is, made a list of all the people I'd harmed. And step 9 is I made amends to them all, except when to do so would injure them or others. And so I think it's really important that if we're going to have peace and reconciliation, the party who has done the hurting, the abuser, has to be ready to move towards an apology. And my experience is that people are very, very inept at this. They don't really know how to do it. They're kind of stuck, or they just don't do it. Mm-hmm. And I've seen some inadequate apologies, and I'll talk as an oblate. In 1991, the Oblates of Mary Immaculate issued an apology at Lac St. Anne for the residential schools for their participation in the residential school systems in Canada. A lady told me a decade later, she said, "I was there at that apology, and I walked out of the church for 10 years because no one took the time to hear my story." So I realized, okay, there's steps to an apology. And I think the first thing is, and it's very scriptural. It's in Matthew chapter 5, verse 23. And Jesus is pretty serious about this. He says, if you have your gift at the altar, if you're in church on Sunday, and you realize, somebody has something against me, leave your gift at the altar. Don't go to church. Go and be reconciled first, and then come and present your gift at the altar. Well, if we took that seriously and literally, half the congregation in any church would probably have to get up and go sort things out with somebody, So I think the first thing is, if I'm aware that somebody's got something against me, I've done something to hurt somebody, well, then I need to go and ask permission, to share something with them. That's the first step. Second step, I need to remind them of what I did, because they may or may not, they might be fuzzy on this or whatever, or they have a different perception. So I need to share with them what I remember happened between us. Do you remember when I said this or did this, a couple of years ago, whatever, 30 years ago, whatever. And so that's the second step. And the third step, I think, is the most important one. It's what we missed as oblates. It's to listen to the pain. It's to soak up the pain. It's to not make excuses. It's to just say, okay, oh, wow, now I know how you feel about what I did to you. That's so important. And as you're doing that, you're allowing that person to start to forgive you, whether they know it or not.
Yeah.
Because if they are able to share their hurt, their pain with you, they're starting to forgive you. It's starting to happen already. But your task is just to soak up the pain. And that's what's missing quite often. People say, sorry, whatever. Well, that's not an apology.
And they mean nothing.
I've seen an abuser tell an 18-year-old girl, oh, I'm sorry if I hurt you. After she shared with him the pain that she felt. At least I talked to her after, you okay? She said, at least he knows how I felt. But it wasn't really an apology. Anyway, we'll finish the process. So once you've listened to the pain and you've soaked up the pain and no defenses, no justifying, no whatever, you just give the hurt person a chance to speak and share their pain, then you can ask for forgiveness. Now, some psychologists would say you shouldn't even do that because that's put pressure on the other person, but you can do it in a way that doesn't. You can just say, can you find it in your heart to forgive me? But once you've listened to that pain, then you're sincere and they'll feel it, and then they know that your apology is really an apology. It's, can you find it in your heart to forgive me? Then what's mostly missing is making a declaration to never do that, to try never to do that again. That's rare. That hardly ever happens. I never did that before until I learned it at a session I was attending. And I was told to apologize without a declaration is almost meaningless. So if I say, well, I'm sorry, whatever, but I don't say, I'm going to try never to do that again, I'm going to go back to step one and say, why did I do that? What do I need to work on? What am I powerless over in my life? It takes you back to, and I go on a healing journey. Maybe it's my impatience. Maybe it's my whatever. Maybe it was some anger that I was carrying. Who do I need to forgive? It's complex, but it's simple. And I think we need to be able to do that, to give somebody's word. And I've experienced that. I've had to apologize to somebody, and I did, and nothing changed. It wasn't reconciled. He wasn't forgiving me until I learned this, and I phoned him up and I said, I renew my apology, and I give you my word that I'll try never to do that again. And his response, oh, now that I've got your word for it, certainly I'll treat you more warmly. And we started talking about skiing, and it was done. This has been a 3-year tense relationship that got solved just like that because of the declaration. And then the last step is, now, how can I make it right? What do I need to do to make amends? That's when the amends comes in. So I think that's the art of an apology.
So there's a couple points that I wrote down as you were talking, where I'll use, like I sponsor a lot of people, so I use the step 8 and 9 quite readily. So one of the things that what I was taught was to write a script. And the reason why to write a script is because I'm the kind of guy who will say sorry for the sun in your eye when I'm making an apology, right? Sorry, I'm so sorry. And then the other thing that I was told is you're not allowed to use the word sorry anymore because it has no meaning to you. You have to now change your vernacular to a place where you're using the word I apologize.
I take responsibility.
And
please forgive me.
And what I apologize means is that I'm going to change my actions.
Exactly, declaration.
So this is how I was taught how to make an amends. One, you say, so I'm just making up a fake one, right? But I'm going to do it on the spot because I go through this so often, especially in that big book study, right? So it's like this. First, you make the schedule and you say, hey, can we meet for coffee? It's in regards to an amends that I need to make to you. This then allows them to say yes or no. Because if they say no,
permission.
There's nothing more that you can do. Right? So then they say yes, so you sit down and you have coffee with them. Then the next thing that you do when you sit down and you have coffee with them, because people like to interject. And so you say, look, I'm going to make this amends to you, but I'd like you to give me about 4 or 5 minutes, and then you're going to have an opportunity to speak. Okay, so then you say, look, when I was in active addiction, I was very manipulative. See, it's not worth saying, I did this situation to you, because you can go on and on and on and on and on. Instead, it's our job to find the behaviors that we don't want to have anymore. And guess where that comes from? That comes from your steps 6 and 7, right? Those are the behaviors you don't want to do because those are the behaviors that you've been inflicting upon people. Yeah. Right? So let's say I say, I'm
4
sorry.
And 5.
Yeah. 4, 5, 6, and 7, because 6 and 7 is to resolve those with your higher power, right? Yeah. So then one of the things that I do is I say, well, look at, I was manipulative, I was maniacal, I was egotistical. I may have put you in dangerous situations by you being around me, and so on and so forth. Then from there, I say, look at, I joined this program called Alcoholics Anonymous. One of the things that they've asked me to do is to make amends to you. And I'm not making this amends to you because I have to. I'm doing this for my own well-being, right? It takes it off of them. And they know how they've been victimized because you just told them all the behaviors that you had did that you don't want to do anymore. And you say, one of the things that I can never promise you is I can never promise you a relapse.
Yeah.
I might
relapse.
I might relapse.
You say, I'll try never to do that again.
So what I was taught to phrase was, I can promise you that I'll stick to a program of recovery. I will always go to meetings. I will always stay in contact with my sponsor. I will always do those things.
That's a declaration.
Now, because of that, the way how, if I'm running a good program, my maniacalness will go away. My ego will go away. These things will go. And,
it's called healing.
And there's your declaration, right? Because now it gives them the all. Now, remember how you were saying, will you forgive me? The trick that my sponsor told me was, ask them if they would like to continue if they would like to continue the relationship with you. And if they say yes, what normal people typically do, like you and I have done, is we almost have boundaries through reciprocal conversation where you have said, Justin, I can do this for you. And I've said, Your Grace, I can do this for you. And we reciprocate in that capacity. So now what you do when you say, well, would you like to start a new relationship with me? This is where you start reciprocating in new boundaries so that you're okay with the way how this relationship can actually move on.
Sort of the amends piece of it.
It becomes, the forgiveness comes to that they're willing to entertain the continuum of the relationship. Yeah. And then it's not really spoken to in a direct way. I like the direct way that you were saying. I agree with that because I think the directness is what's missing with a lot of people. I like that. Would you like to continue this relationship?
That's a good way to put it.
Because sometimes that's the way. Now, when we talked about to injure them or others, big thing that we have to remember here in an amends is it has nothing to do with me. If I'm going to go to jail and I've stood in this place, going to go make amends to community and society, I could have went and did 14 years in prison. Guess what? We cannot shrink. You have to go through with whatever you have to go through. And so on the premise of this art of the apology, in regards to how an institution can utilize this in a public way, because let's face it, and I'm going to use the Catholic Church as an example in the moment, the big piece that they're missing is the act of contrition. They haven't publicly came and made an act of contrition. And this is why I think even as a survivor of sexual abuse, I look at this and I say, yeah, okay, I personally am I'm okay with forgiving. Okay. But I understand without that admission of contrition, why the public themselves doesn't want or is reluctant. Right. And I think that has to happen. As much as contrition should be private, right? We all do, as Catholics, we do an act of contrition prior to going into confession. And that's what we do in a private way. But unfortunately, I think as an institution, this is just my opinion and idea, I don't think that this institution particularly is in a position to be private about it because it's been so public, right? Yeah. So I think that's the piece that can happen. But when it comes to the actual apology piece of an institution, the people can make speeches, and
Harper issued one on the part of the Canadian government, and whether that was received or not or whatever depends on what follows up after that. As you say, the making amends is a big part of it. Just before we leave what you were sharing before, I'm just thinking, where would you put the listening to the feelings, soaking up their pain in terms of what you were...
Oh, I'm sorry. I did miss that step. So prior to asking if you want to continue with the relationship, you're supposed to ask them, what have I missed? Okay. Is there anything that I've missed? Mm-hmm. And so in my personal, personally, my youngest brother has not accepted my amends and still does not. Right. Mm-hmm. That's up to him. That's his baggage. Yeah. Right. Yeah. The only thing I can do is continue on in a life of recovery, be recovered, practice being recovered, and maybe he'll come around.
Oh yeah. You hope and pray.
But at the end of the day, when I asked him, what have I missed? He couldn't tell me.
Many people are not ready to be able to do that. Yeah, they just don't know how.
And so this is the other thing is what needs to be asked with either your spiritual director, your mentor, your sponsor, whoever it is that you're looking at this amends with, is the other person ready for your amends? Because that's how I've harmed my brother by giving an amends that he wasn't ready to hear. And the reason why I did that is because now he's acting out. He's acting out in a way so malicious against me to anybody in my family because all he likes to say is Justin's apology to me was just bullshit. Mm-hmm. And that's fine. He's entitled to that opinion. Yeah. But the reality is it actually invoked more anger. He wasn't as angry before and he wasn't as vocal about it. And so I probably jumped the gun in my early recovery. That's my responsibility. That's fine. I did not discern that apology or that amends in an appropriate way.
Maybe you need to apologize to him again for jumping the gun.
He won't talk to me. Literally will not.
Write him a letter.
Yeah. I mean, I'm there.
I've done that with a brother oblate, actually, an older man. An older, and we were in a conversation and things got kind of heated. And I realized, okay, maybe I said things I shouldn't have said, and he probably did too, and whatever. And a month and a half later, I'm still carrying this. I thought, well, I got to practice what I'm teaching and I got to practice the program. So I wrote him a letter. And first of all, I apologized to him for whatever I might have said to hurt his feelings. And could he let me know how he feels because I'd like to apologize? And then I let him know how I felt about what he had said. And just said, I'm trying to forgive you. And I mailed the letter. I was scared to because this is an 80-year-old oblate, and I've never done this before. I saw him a couple months later, and I said, oh, Father, you get my letter a couple months ago? Yes. I said, well, anything we need to talk about? It's all in the past. And he walked away. And I thought, oh, my God, I think this man, God bless him, doesn't really know how to forgive or how to ask for forgiveness and how to be reconciled. And I thought, what's he been preaching all these years? It really kind of shocked me. Left me feeling kind of sad, but I felt free. I had done whatever I could do. I tried to forgive him. I tried to apologize. That's his responsibility now. So a couple of years later, I went to his funeral and I paid my respects and said a little prayer. And then I said to him, Father, now you understand. Why wait till you're dead, Yeah. No, this is something we're supposed to do now. Don't let the sun go down in your anger. We need to be forgiving each other, apologizing each other, being reconciled any way we can, as best as we can.
There's a thing I heard a little while ago that'll fit with this. And it used to say there are no reasonable resentments.
No, there's no point for people to carry resentments.
There is never a situation that's justifiable for a reasonable resentment.
What's it say? That resentment is kind of like drinking alcohol, poison and thinking it's going to hurt the other person or something like that?
Yeah, that's right. You're trying to drink booze to hurt the other. I'm getting drunk at them.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it just doesn't fit. The other thing too that I have learned over time is a spot check is if you have omitted feelings towards somebody, you need to make amends for that as well, because you weren't being honest. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I have done just recently, actually with another person, was I said, look, we have to have a conversation about a particular issue. But I said, I cannot do it now because emotionally, I'm going to say a lot of stuff. You
got to be ready.
I'm not ready to do this. I'm going to say some stuff I'm going to regret.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm trying to tell. What I am going to tell you is I'm not happy about this. And we're going to talk about it in a couple of days from now. Mm-hmm. That's why when I went and did my inventory that night, I could say that I did not omit any feelings from anybody.
Yeah.
Because if I recognize that I've omitted something from somebody, my resentment. I probably have a check in resentment. I probably also have a check in selfish. I probably also have a check in fear. I was being fearful, right? And if those three things are rocking my life, and all by an omission of feelings, that is ridiculous to be. I can't sleep, and it's ridiculous to be holding myself over a barrel of water over that.
Yeah. I think that's important too. When you flip it, and you're apologizing to somebody. That's why it's really important to give them the opportunity to share their feelings with you, so that they don't miss anything either, and they can empty themselves of that. That's what forgiveness is. It's we're given two options by psychologists when we're hurt: fight or flight. And I've learned from a friend of mine whose dad was an alcoholic and a sexual abuser that she would freeze. So you got fight, flight, or freeze. Three options. Well, we've got a fourth one, which is forgive. It takes a lot of faith, though. For anger, we're going to fight. For afraid, we're going to freeze or flee. But if we've got lots of faith, we can forgive. We can try to let go of it and to forgive and to be able to take all that energy, that dark energy, and instead of fighting or fleeing or freezing, we just hold it, ponder it, pray about it, share it, vent it with other people, with the trustworthy. And then we can give that back to those who stirred it up in us in the first place, but do it with love. No getting even, no name calling, no revenge. And that's pure love. That's forgiveness. It's unconditional love. And I was taught by a therapist, to confront with expectation is already manipulation.
That's right.
It's amazing. That one sentence just kind of rocked me. To confront with expectation is already manipulation. It's no longer love. You're trying to get even. You're trying to get something from that person. That's not forgiveness,
Yeah.
So it's got to be pure. So on both sides, if we're trying to forgive, it's got to be pure forgiveness. If we're going to apologize, it's got to be very humble apology, coming from the heart.
And I can say this, I've learned more from my brother not forgiving me than forgiving me. The amends that went easy, right? And they were like, there's nothing you missed. It's okay, let's move on. Those are great. But the ones that I actually learned something from where they're like, whoa, you really don't know how much of an asshole you were, right? I'm about to tell you. You ready? Hold on, because we're going into it. Yeah. And that was okay because I could sit back, and it wasn't about the situation that they're expressing to me. Instead, what I'm actually looking at is, well, what's the behavior that I was really acting out in? Because I'll never be able to stop situations. I'm not God. No. But what I can stop is my behaviors, right? Because my behavior is the stem of many different situations.
And you're putting your finger on, I think, a spiritual principle that God turns everything to the good for those who love him. So when stuff happens, like when bad things happen to good people, you could say, well, why is that happening to me? But instead of that, grow through it. Use it to grow. And you learn more from your brother's lack of forgiveness than if it had been easy. Yeah, it's our suffering. It's that forms our character. It's when things don't go that well. It's when we're going through crap in our lives. That's when we start really learning wisdom and deep lessons. So it's always, you can't lose. With God, you're always winning.
So let's pivot a little bit. If you were the ruler of the world, let's say, how would you instruct an institution to make amends? What would be the play sheet for you?
It's a tough one because what happens, or what has been happening, I think, is legalities get in the road. We had a dream that the bishops, the church, the alb, whatever, could do 3 years of listening conferences across the country and soak up the pain or whatever, and then issue an apology and celebrate that. And of course, that went nowhere because everybody's afraid of litigation. And the cry is out now for Pope Francis to come to Canada and issue an apology. And I'd love it if he could do that, because I think, when the group went to Rome and Pope Benedict expressed regret, that really wasn't a full apology. I think if you look at this, being able to follow these steps, like listening to the pain, we still need to listen to the pain. And that's happening quite a bit in many dioceses across the country. Lots is happening. I'm amazed. I did a little bit of a survey, and I couldn't believe how much stuff is actually happening, in all kinds of different ways to reconciliation. So that's good news. But we need to do more of that. And it's very difficult for an institution, but we need to be able to find ways. And we're doing stuff like this here, protecting minors from sexual abuse. We're doing from pain to hope and documents like that. So some things are happening. But I think it would be really great if if Pope Francis could come to Canada and, soak up some of the pain. He's listened to some of the victims or whatever, sexual abuse here and there, Ireland, whatever. Do some of that here as best as he can, as best as we can as a Canadian church. I think that's where we need to move in that direction, do a lot more of listening and soaking up the pain. And then somehow it would really be appropriate, if there could be more of a firm apology issued on the part of the church. And then that declaration, I think we're doing the declaration already. Stuff like this is really part of that declaration. We're changing our way of dealing with human sexuality. It's coming. But then making amends. How do we make amends? I think that's the crucial thing. And I think we may have to have rubber hitting the road and putting more funds into healing and reconciliation as much as we can in terms of dioceses, in terms of an institution. I would see us trying to flesh out or live the art of the apology ourselves as an institution.
I agree. I think if it was a perfect world and we were the rulers of that perfect world, because of course it would be perfect within our ideology, I guess, I think that would be great. But truly, it is one of those things too where litigation does play a factor in things, And that being said, even from my own personal experience, you were there when I was standing in court. You weren't in the courtroom itself, but you were there in spirit when I was standing in that courtroom. And sure, we had it all worked out for an optimal sentence. But the judge at any time could have said, "No, sir, that's not happening. You're doing the 8 to 14 years. You're doing it."
Yeah.
And as much as the lawyers had worked out what they were going to work out, this is ultimately it's up to the judge, at the end of the day. And I understand that fear. I get it. But what I have learned in that vulnerable moment is that God is really that powerful. He is so powerful that if you can step into that light of faith, nothing is going to get in between you impacting the apology that needs to be handed out the way that it's handed out. Yeah. And I think in anybody who's dealing with judicial issues, when it comes to making amends to community, the community is more accepting about that amends than one would actually think. Alternative measures it's like this. I have come to learn that the community actually accepts my apology more without me being in prison than me being in prison.
Yeah.
And the reason for it is because I'm actually showing that my behaviors and actions have changed.
Yeah.
It's like this. You could be in a drunk driving accident, and God forbid that your children die from the accident. But really, for the listeners, think about this for a moment. That person going to jail is not going to be justified. And what would mean more to you is if the person were to say to you, "This is how I've changed my actions, and it's not going to happen again," because you've already lost those lives. They're gone. Yeah. And vindication and vendetta is not yours to burden, right? And I think that's where, like on the last podcast when I was with my co-host Kenny, that's what I was talking about, how I let go of vendetta. I used to be the grand schemer of vendetta. Yeah. And that's not a nice place to be acting out. Yeah.
Yeah, when we can see forgiveness really happen, it's beautiful. Like Mary Johnson, CBS in the States did a documentary on her son was killed at a party when he was 16. No, by a 16-year-old. I think her son was about that same age. And of course, he was in prison for 17 and a half years. But eventually, she knew for her own well-being she had to try to forgive him. So she started meeting with him in prison. And eventually she was able to forgive him and then invited him to move next door to her in her apartment block. And now they're actually really close. She treats him like the son she's lost. And when she was interviewed by, I think it's Steve Chapman, I'm pretty sure, who could hardly believe this, and she said, unforgiveness is like cancer. It eats us from the inside out. It's not about, I'm sure he murdered my son, but if I can't forgive him, it's like it's cancer. It's eating me up, not him. And so she did it for herself. And I think, that's part of we need to be able to do that too. We need to apologize for ourselves and the others as well, but also to forgive for ourselves and the others as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think this is our hour. We're up. I'm going to close the show. But I'm going to leave links. Are you okay to tell people where they can get a hold of you?
Yeah, sure.
So Facebook, Sylvain Lavoie.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
They can get a hold of you there, or they can get a hold of you at Star of the North through the website.
Yeah.
Don't call. Go to the website, please and thank you. I'll put that down.
I have a website as well.
Oh, what's your website?
Archbishop Sylvain Lavoie.
Okay. So I'll leave those at the bottom links on the blog.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't leave them, unfortunately, in the podcast bottom. They don't let me do that.
Oh, okay.
But I'll leave it on the blog at the very least. So...
Then you got some books coming out as well, or one coming out.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the books are available from Amazon or Novalis. The first one was Drumming from Within on Native Ministry.
Yeah.
Second one was Together We Heal. It's on the 12-step approach to the healing of sexual abuse. Third one was Walk a New Path, which is on addictions awareness. And the one coming out in the spring is Still Green and Growing.
Okay.
And it's about personal growth, inner healing, and second half of life.
And it's coming out this spring.
Yeah.
That's fantastic news.
And there'll be a chapter there on forgiveness and a chapter in there on the art of apology.
What we'll do when those come out is we'll have you come back on the show.
Sure.
And then what we'll do too is we'll put a hot link right to the Amazon, right to the Amazon buy page. So if you guys, all you Pride-omaniacs out there, those people who are diehard Life on Life's Terms listeners, I appreciate you for listening, and I also thank you for coming in and talking about this topic that we were both kind of
nervous about,
a little bit nervous about, but I think it came off better than okay, actually. So please share and subscribe. Tell all your friends about this content and all of the episodes that you've listened to throughout Life on Life's Terms history. Where you can find the after show thoughts or blogs is at www.lifeonlifestermspodcast.com. You'll be able to see the monthly themes like this monthly theme. It's Movember. That's why I have a mustache on my face for the men's health and men's awareness for mental health and so on and so forth, as well as prostate cancer awareness this month. Please become a Pride member as fast as you can at your earliest convenience. You only have to just give us your email on our email list, and then what ends up happening is you'll be privileged to all of the upcoming events and all of the new content that's coming out, as well as, again, those blogs that I was talking about. So again, please become a Pride member at your soonest convenience, and thanks for listening, and we will talk to you guys tomorrow. Bye for now.